Welcome back to this week's edition of Modern Tech and Transformation. I'm excited to have a familiar face with us again, Musab Joffrey. Thank you for coming back.
Well, thank you for having me again.
And today we are going to talk about the gold of the business world, data, and more specifically, data platforms. So, exciting topic, a topic that's affecting many organizations right now from conferences we've been at. It seems just to be a trending topic, a challenge. So, really excited to dive in.
Well, definitely. And, data is gold, like you said, just like oil was for the previous century. Data is for this one. So, definitely.
So, to start off, talk me through data transformation platforms.
So, data platforms, let's talk about what that is, right? So, these are like tools and solutions already pre built with custom connectors already defined for different existing platforms for picking up data from one end, like sources,
Mhm.
to our targets, where you can extract the data, transform the data, and then load the data. So you bring in the data from the source to the target, and the data is then combined or transformed upon for visualizations or for analysis, for whatever the need is for the client. And that's where data transformation comes into play. Now, we have two different approaches, like we talked about right just now, where either you can go with a solution that is already pre-built, or you can go with a custom one. So you can have either of the solution based upon what the requirement is. Now, one of the cases that we usually go with, and it's easier to start with, is a pre-built solution, right?
Mhm.
Because there you have no code approach. It's cheaper because you have a smaller team and you have less maintenance, right? But when you go with a custom one, it's more flexibility. So it's based upon the scenario, but we can definitely talk about that.
Okay, so that makes sense. And what scenarios, as companies are transforming their data, mostly they want to do it to get ready for AI, right? That's what we're seeing a lot of, or they still have major data silos. I mean, one guy told us he had just a box of paper file data, which almost gave me a heart attack. But we see
Yes,
data.
sir.
We see data and hear about data in all forms or fashions. When would you recommend, and you kind of touched on this, the data like pre-built platform, data transformation platform to a custom platform?
So if I would look at a requirement,
Mhm.
excuse me there, and I would say that, let's say if we have a very small, non-complex requirement that would like require a very simple job from like picking up some data, perform very simple task on it, I would prefer a no code approach,
Okay, what's a simple task? What do you consider a simple task?
like picking up data from A
Uh-huh.
and probably changing a little bit or cleaning up a little bit from, a few columns in the data or omitting few rows based on a criteria like, I would say that I don't want data from certain dates or I don't want data which have like certain attributes to them and, small attributes or small filter requirements, stuff like that. And then I would just load the rest of the data and, target tables. I would say that that's a simple requirement. I would say that, that's a perfect example for going with a no-code approach. I can still go for a medium level requirement with a no-code approach as well, where I would bring in like from multiple sources. And if that data has links to it. For example, I have like source A, source B, and source C, and all of those data have something that links to them. I had a project way back where we were processing HL7 messages, which is healthcare data.
Okay.
So we were bringing in data for patients, and these patients had data coming in from one provider as well as from another provider, which had test reports as well. So we had a unique identifier, right? We know that this patient's unique identifier for this provider is this, and the tests that are coming or reports that are coming from a test provider is like having the same unique identifier. So I mean, this is what we can use to identify that, okay, this is where we can converge the data. So that's like an easy task to do. All we had to do was connect to those two sources, bring in the data, combine the data, and load it all into the target tables. And voila,
Yeah.
we have the ETL process completed, and we didn't need any customer integration for that. If the requirements go like more complex, I would say it's like, you know, process me this, bring me data, perform like hours long worth of computation on that data. And now my platforms has a limitation, like I cannot do computation for X amount of hours because otherwise it would cost me too much. Or maybe, you know, there's a timeout requirement for X amount of time the API request can go. Like for instance, I have another project where I am fetching data from an API, and that API is, for whatever reasons, I mean, I know in a general way why that API might be taking too long to respond, but there is a load time that takes 4 hours to fetch data.
Oh, wow.
So my Azure Data Factory cannot wait 4 hours. It's going to time out. So I need custom code there. That custom code can run in the background, can do those paged polls over and over and over again. It's going to take in all the data, combine it all. It can drop in a storage account. And then maybe I can have a hybrid approach that, you know, my custom connector can then do that part. Then my Azure Data Factory, my no-code approach part, can come in and do the rest of the job so that I don't have to do the whole custom part, just a small custom part. So that's actually kind of a hybrid approach as well. We could have built the whole thing custom as well, but that would have been more testing, more work, because when it comes to custom, of course, then there's more maintenance.
Yes.
Then there's more optimization. Then there's scalabilities on your lap as well.
And
So,
cost.
Of course,
And
the cost, because then you have to get the skills
Mm-hmm.
that you need from your team to be able to build all of that. So, of course, then a lot of more things come into your lab as opposed to when you're having a platform that's already pre-built. All you have to do is, you know, deploy, start, and configure.
No, that's good examples. I understand it more so than I did from listening to you, so thank you. And I know we touched on this. How do factors like scalability, cost, and maintenance come into play when they're doing these, a company is doing a large data project?
That's actually a good question, because when you start a project, a lot of different factors come into play as like, what's the budget? What's the play here with how much data are you gonna start with for your dev environment versus how much it's gonna be for your production environment. You start with a project with a smaller set of data to test and see what your strategy is gonna be around that data. And then when you're done with that data and you're like, yeah, I know how will I proceed towards my production, then you go into it in a full-fledged manner and you scale up, right? So that's when you strategize and you see that, okay, my POC, my proof of concept, had these challenges, and okay, these things are not possible with a pre-built solutions. Maybe I should have gone with a custom solution or not. So it's good to strategize before with a subset of data as opposed to, you know, going full-fledged with your complete set of, you know, production data. So,
do you have to talk businesses out of just going full force with a complete set, or do most of them say, let's use a subset?
some of the businesses don't. They already have an idea on
Okay.
what they want, and sometimes it could be a wrong idea. I mean, it's okay. It's a learning curve with their use cases at times, and some of the businesses don't want to spend more money, or they already have bought licenses before and they want to use that. So it's challenge at times, or you know, sometimes they are open to ideas and they're like, yeah, of course, this makes sense. Let's go with this. So of course, when you're starting, you're like, okay, if a no-code approach comes into play, the only cost in the beginning is licensing, right? And then you start with a small data set. There's a lesser cost when it comes to compute. It's a lesser cost when it comes to, you know, storing the data. And of course, there's a very small cost when it comes to team, because you don't need a very high skilled team. And even if you bring in people who are not used to that particular platform, they can learn it because it's like drag and drop with pre-built connectors, and it's a very friendly user interface. I wouldn't say it's too friendly, but it's still friendly, right? But if you hit a roadblock and you're like, okay, fair enough, maybe a certain integration is not going to work out. Like for instance, in one of my projects, we had a SOAP API, and with Azure Data Factory, we don't have a connector for SOAP API. And on top of that, we had OAuth 1.0, which is also not compatible with Azure Data Factory. We figured that, okay, now we have to go custom.
Mm-hmm.
So we figured that if we have to build custom, we need to find specific skill set. Of course, on short term, then you have to make some compromises. You have to see what skills your team already has and what you can build on. If you have Python or Java within the team or C Sharp, or it depends.
Mm-hmm.
You make some compromises, you see what you can build upon and what can be scalable, what can be maintainable from within the team, because you have to make sure of two things: cost on the client, maintainability, and testability, of course. Then, of course, every custom thing will have those responsibilities like we talked about already in your lab, that there will be a cost to the team because you will have to expand the development team accordingly, and you will test it, and there will be a lot of testing. You'll have to have test cases, you have to unit test, then you have to integration test, then you have to host that somewhere, of course in the cloud, but still you have to provision that resource, then you have to see if that resource is scaling properly, and as more data comes, it has to scale either up or scale out. And then, of course, as we go along, you have to make sure that it maintains with no code approach. Like, for instance, ADF, Azure Data Factory, Microsoft is responsible for maintaining that, patching it up every time it needs patching for a no code approach, for a custom code approach. We have to patch it up every time there's an issue, a bug comes along. We have to put in monitoring ourselves. We have to look at the logs. If there's an error, we have to make sure that those logs are being looked at.
Yeah.
You don't just fire and forget. So there are challenges, of course. So the best case scenario and the easiest approach is always going to be that let's see if the solution can be taken care of with a no-code approach, because that's going to be the least cost, least effort solution for both the client and the people who are developing it. But if you look at the more flexible one, then it's got to be the full custom connection.
Okay.
But
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of selling me on this no code though. But to wrap up,
even though I have more fun with the custom one,
of course.
because then I have the flexibility to do what I want the way I want, so that I can basically go in, make the change that I need to make to, actually build the use case that I need, instead of looking at, okay, how I can do that in this pre-built thing, because of course that pre-built has its own limitations. It has its own use cases built, and then you have to bend a little bit to that, right?
And
I was a developer some time ago.
Yeah. So it's more fun for you to do the custom projects.
Yes.
And to wrap up, any success stories about data platforms you've built recently that you want to share with us?
Well, the one that I'm working with right now, it's an energy sector company. It's based out of Houston, and so we started working with them. They had like 3 different integrations that they wanted us to work on, and one of them had the issue that it couldn't be integrated with Azure Data Factory. So we, in the end, had to go in and had to write a middleware, a complete custom solution, so that it could integrate with Azure Data Factory. And it did derail us in the project plan a little bit, and but there was a thrill of the show, and it was fun. I mean, a couple of sleepless nights, but then we were back on track. It was fun. Customers happy.
Good.
In the end, so.
And what were they trying to achieve by doing this data project?
So it's a startup, and they have a lot of data around different sensors and different let's say meters
Mhm.
and a lot of different devices that are bringing in a lot of data. And then they have other data that's coming in around work orders, purchase orders, and basically things that can accrue them a lot of revenue. So all that is connected. And
Okay.
these three different sources, we have to pull in all of that data so that they can create reports on it. And then they have their own stakeholders that they have to bring those reports to them. And the end goal has been so that those reports can be done. And they're in the process of completing those reports, and they have a stakeholder meeting coming up.
That's
So
exciting.
yeah, so fingers crossed. We're happy. We're excited that, and we're like, show us those reports so that we are also like, pumped
Yeah.
up. Yeah, yay! We're like the cheerleaders in this.
Yes,
on
a
the
true
side.
partnership.
Yeah, I mean, we want to see you guys succeed because we've worked really hard for that.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But thank you, Masab, for joining us again. I
course.
always enjoy talking to you. I always learn something.
Definitely,
So,
it's fun.
yeah, appreciate it. And we will see you all next week.